on the link between mental health and gun violence. It's an honor to present Kathy Fernandez-Rundle.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you, Cy, and thank you for all being here and covering this. I am very proud to be here today, here in D.C., knowing that hundreds of thousands of young people, all people, but mostly students from my state, here to demand that our government listen to them, and our government that serves them, they are asking demands of them. And it is in the form of gun reforms and more responsible gun ownership. And because of the power of these young voices that we've seen and watched, they've been either directly or indirectly the traumatized victims of gun violence for far too long. And finally, I really believe, as Cy said, though we failed, our generation, we tried, but I really believe now there is a change coming. And I believe they are going to get it done. Where I live, unfortunately, I live with mothers of murdered children, fathers of murdered children. There's a lot of gun violence, unfortunately, in our communities. And so we have to be speaking for them as well, that may not have the power of voice and time to be here with us, but they're grateful that everyone is speaking out on their behalf. Now, because Florida recently did make some changes, and those were good changes, and we're glad that they did, unfortunately, they were not enough. Florida, unfortunately, is often referred to as the gunshine state. It failed to ban the sale of assault weapons. We need our federal government to recognize that these military killing machines have no place in America's neighborhoods or in our streets or in our schools. The AR-15 and its many variations have become the weapons of choice for many mass shooters besides Nicholas Cruz, who massacred 17 students and wounded 16 others. The gunman at the First Baptist Church in Sutherland Springs, Texas, he used an assault-style weapon, 26 dead and 20 injured. The gunman in Las Vegas, in the strip shooting mall, he used an assault-style weapon and a bump stock. The result, 58 dead people and 851 injured. The gunman in Orlando, in my state, in Florida, in the nightclub, he used an assault-style weapon. 49 people shot and dead and 58 injured. And the list goes on. It truly is a time now, and not wait for the next massacre. We're all back here again. It's now's the time to really make those changes. The other two things that we want to address, that my colleagues mentioned, is strengthening background checks. They need to be universal background checks that recognize mental health illness, domestic violence issues, in every sale of every firearm, not just limited ones by certain dealers. The federal government also needs to incentivize states to allow for a gun violence restraining order, or as Mike spoke of from LA, a red flag law. This will allow police, with the approval of the courts, to disarm or take arms away from someone who is in the middle of some kind of a mental health episode or crisis. And finally, I just want to say thank you so much to the David Hoggs of the world, to those students, to those parents, to those families who have made such a powerful movement begin. And I am grateful to you for your courage to stand up and be counted. And we're going to have to listen to you, and we're going to have to make some changes. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Our next speaker has been working on gun violence issues for well over 2 decades. I've been very proud to have the opportunity to work with her. Senator Dianne Feinstein came to the issue of gun violence from a searing personal experience. And since that time, she has made gun violence prevention not just an issue, but a cause. She's one of the most important leaders in our nation on so many issues. She demonstrated tremendous courage, determination, and resolve on the issue of gun violence prevention, and it is a privilege, Senator Feinstein, to have you speak with us.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. And to all of the distinguished people here, to the law enforcement, and to you, thank you so much for being here. Cy, it's great to see you again, too. This has been a long road. I began it in 1993 with an assault weapons legislation that everybody said would not become law, that did become law. And then they began to debunk it. We had to have a sunset clause of 10 years. But what has been revealed is that gun massacres and numbers of shootings and numbers of wounded have all went down during that period. And after that period, the surge came up. And in fact, some 18 million assault weapons have been put on our streets since that time. These are military weapons. They kill large numbers of people in close combat. They have specific features that do that. They are not hunting weapons. They are not defensive weapons. They are aggressive weapons. And what we have also seen, and I thought with Columbine it would be the last school shooting, and then with Sandy Hook, when I saw 6- and 7-year-old smiling faces, I thought that would never happen again. And I'm delighted that the distinguished Senator Blumenthal is here from the state of Connecticut, who went through it firsthand and will be speaking. But I was wrong. Since that time, there have been some 200 such massacres, nearly one a month. And schools, which were in my day, and in Senator Blumenthal's days, safe places are no longer safe places. And so we have students here saying, if you can't do it, we're going to do it, but we're not going to tolerate it anymore. Ladies and gentlemen, this can be done. We can pass a bill. We can get these weapons, the supply of them diminished. We can get the big clips stopped. We can get the bump stocks stopped. And we can get assault weapons stopped. And this is what we're trying to do. It's a long road. It's a hard road. I don't know whether we'll be successful or not, but I do know this, that if we are, it will save life. And every American should be saying enough is enough. Please stand with us, help us, march with us, and this weekend, when the young people come forward, know that there are a lot of us who will be following you, and we will do our level best here to get adequate legislation passed. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Richard Blumenthal is the senior senator from the state of Connecticut. He has been a leader on gun violence prevention issues, and he is showing the way again, crossing the aisle with Senator Lindsey Graham to join together on legislation that I'll let him describe that could save lives. Senator Blumenthal, it's a pleasure to have you with us. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Senator, good to see you again. Thank you so much for coming. I want to express my appreciation to my former colleagues in law enforcement and express my thanks to you for being here. You have helped to carry this torch in such a powerful way, to the advocates from all of the groups involved, a growing number, and inspiring and energizing us. And most importantly, to the students, David and Elia, who are here, represent literally millions across the country, hundreds of thousands in Connecticut, who are showing us the way, literally. We are in the midst of a new social movement, much like the civil rights movement, the marriage equality movement, the anti-war movement, the women's health care movement, fueled, powered, driven by young people. That has always been the way change, particularly revolutionary change, has been accomplished in this country. It's in the great American tradition that they are marching in Washington, and they are marching on our consciences. Our blood, your hands. That's what they are saying to us. That's what the sign the other day said to all Americans. Our blood, your hands. It's on us. And they are rightly marching on our consciences every day, every hour, to show us that 90 deaths every day in America is simply an intolerable fact of our life. We are the only country that has that rate of deaths. We have no higher rate of mental illness than any other modern industrialized country. We have a rate of gun violence that is off the charts, many multiples of other countries. So we can do something not only to say enough is enough, but to show that we will no longer tolerate what's happening now. Enough is enough, must stop. We cannot send our young people to school with bulletproof backpacks. What kind of country are we that says the new normal is bulletproof backpacks and armed teachers? Armed teachers is toxic lunacy. It has been rejected by the educational community, by students, parents, school boards, everyone with any knowledge about this subject, including our law enforcement community. But we know that some things work. Background checks work. A ban on assault weapons works. A ban on high-capacity magazine works. And yes, a red flag statute, emergency risk orders work. How do we know they work? Because they've been tried. In Connecticut, with the strongest gun laws, or among them in the country, crime has been reduced, gun violence has been reduced. Let's go with experience. In Connecticut, 100 to 150 on average people every year are prevented from buying or having guns because they are an imminent risk. They are in crisis. They are dangerous to themselves or others. 6 states have these statutes. They require warrants or court orders, proof of dangerousness with fact-based evidence. They are tailored to preserve individual due process. They in no way infringe on Second Amendment rights, but they enable law enforcement and sometimes family members to say to a court, this person is a dangerous threat to himself or others, whether it is a spouse about to be killed or a school about to be shot or some other dangerous risk. The last state to adopt these statutes was Florida, where today the Orlando Sentinel reported that a UCF student, Chris Velasquez, told people he was, quote, one life-altering event like getting fired or going through a breakup from gathering the courage to open fire on an Orlando school. According to court records, he owned a revolver. The Orlando police used this new statute from Florida to take away his gun and save lives. Red flag statutes save lives. That is the reason that Senator Graham and I have introduced a measure, a federal law that authorizes law enforcement to go to a federal judicial officer, federal court, and ask for a warrant or a court order that removes guns and prevents their sale to someone who is dangerous to himself or others. There is a standard for what constitutes proof and what constitutes the evidence. They're not just making it up. They're not inventing a rule here. It has proved to save lives. And this measure has growing bipartisan support. I'm hopeful that it will be included as part of a comprehensive package, and it must be a comprehensive package. We cannot fall into the NRA's trap of saying, as they do, that statute wouldn't have prevented this mass shooting. There's no single panacea. It has to be a comprehensive package, and the red flag statute is one very, very important part of it. And I hope that we can muster the bipartisan support for a real package. Now, you'll hear that the omnibus budget has a couple of very modest proposals. I've supported the Fix-Nix proposal. We're having more information submitted to the background check system is a good idea. They're already required to submit this information. The Fix-Nix proposal provides a couple of additional incentives so that more convictions will be reported by states. There is a measure relating to the Dickey Amendment, which right now is interpreted to bar research. That's good too. But these are baby steps when we need real reform. We cannot be distracted or deterred from the march, the real march here, which is the march this Saturday, but even more, the march that has to be a marathon. We are not in a sprint. It is a marathon. And I will just say, finally, I've been involved in this cause for about 25 years. When I was elected Attorney General in the early 1990s, I spearheaded legislation to ban assault weapons. Then I defended it in court, tried the case, argued the appeal. We were successful against all the arguments that are made now against an assault weapon ban. Connecticut has helped to lead the way, but I can tell you we are in a new era now, a different kind of social movement. And we need to sustain this energy going into the summer and the fall and these elections, and we have to hold accountable anybody in elected office who opposes real reform that will make America safer. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Congressman Salud Carbajal represents a district in California where there was an act of gun violence that was the catalyst for a major change, the enactment of a law like that which Senator Blumenthal just described. Congressman Carbajal is leading a bipartisan effort on these orders as well. And it's an honor, Congressman, to have you join us. Salud.
Thank you, Mike. Good afternoon, and thank you, Los Angeles City Attorney Mike Feuer and the prosecutors against gun violence for putting this together. I never thought I would be proud to say that I just got an F. I got an F from the NRA. That's the rating they gave me because of my sensible positions regarding gun safety laws. I want to acknowledge the Parkland students, David Hogg that is here, and Aaliyah, a student from another area. Want to recognize them for their courage to sustain this effort, to finally help us get over the finish line like something we haven't been able to do. And what's going to make the difference is going to be them. The march is coming this Saturday. That's going to continue the momentum. But I just want to recognize the young people for having the courage to stand up and to speak out. In 2014, there was a mass shooting in Isla Vista that could have been prevented with a gun violence restraining order law. California moved forward with such a law and demonstrated that it works. It can work. Moreover, personally, I lost my older sister to gun violence. When I was a young boy, my oldest sister committed suicide with my father's revolver. I know too well the tragedies that come from gun violence. And that is why I am so proud to have partnered with Senator Feinstein to move forward H.R. 2598, the GVRO Incentive Grant Program. What it does, it incentivizes states and local communities to move forward similar GVRO laws and work with the courts and law enforcement to provide training and actual programs that work. As was mentioned earlier, GVROs provide due process. It allows family members and law enforcement to identify somebody in crisis, to be able to work through the court system to provide due process, in a way that affords due process but temporarily takes away guns from owning guns or buying guns temporarily by an individual who has demonstrated that they are in crisis. I think enough is enough. I think it's time to take action here in Congress. Let's not be another do-nothing Congress. Let's step up, let's heed the words and advocacy of our young people, and let's make a difference for a change. By golly, this is the darn United States of America and the United States Congress, and we need to stand for something other than gridlock and bipartisan gamemanship. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman. So the students from Parkland, you know, with all the attention those students have been getting, it's easy to forget that just weeks ago, these students survived a horrible event. And many lesser people would have been frozen by the trauma from that event. These students have chosen to galvanize the attention of a nation with their determination, with their tenacity, and their unflinching honesty. Epitomizing those qualities is our next speaker, David Hogg, student from Parkland, but more importantly, a key voice now in our nation's effort to create common sense gun violence laws across the country. David?
First off, I want to thank these senators and the United States Congress for having me here today. But the first thing that I want to cover is something that I'm not hearing a lot about right now, and that's the fact that many of these communities where gun violence occurs are places of a lower socioeconomic status where people expect these things to happen. We assume that this is an inevitable thing that will always happen. I was just at Thurgood Marshall High School here in Washington, D.C. They've had multiple students die as a result of gun violence. I spoke with the twin brother of one and the boyfriend of the same one, and both have the same thing in common as the Parkland students, and so does everybody else with gun violence. And that's the fact that it was a gun that took the lives of one of their loved ones. And it's the fact that regardless of your race, regardless of your religion, regardless of where you come from, we are all human. We bleed the same blood, and we all suffer the same. People need to realize that this is nothing new. This has been happening in communities across America. This happened once in Parkland, but this is an everyday thing for many students, especially in poor areas that politicians need to focus on. Many of these people that are here, they're in gerrymandered districts so that their voices can't be heard as much and politicians can suppress them. It is time to change that. The United States Census is going to come out, and that is when states are going to redistrict. We need to make sure that everybody's voice, regardless of the color of their skin, their ethnicity, where they come from, or their religion, or their creed or class, it doesn't matter. We are all Americans. Our voices are all equal. But when these districts are drawn so that we can discriminate against poor communities, minority communities, and communities of different ethnicities, so we can continue to continue the legacy of racial discrimination in this country, that is something that is not American. It is something that is absolutely corrupt and something that we have to change. The second thing that I want to talk about is I hear often that the adults failed us. I think it's our policymakers that failed us. Not all of them, but many of them did, especially the ones that are supported by the NRA. And what's important to realize is there are 435 members of the United States House. Only over 200 of them don't have a firm stance on whether or not they are supported by the NRA or where they stand. To those politicians, I say, come out today on your website, tweet out about it, put it on Facebook, put it on Twitter, everything, so that your constituents can know where you stand on these policies and they can be well informed. Because right now, the reason why these things are happening is because people have not been informed, and you, as the leaders of this country, have misguided them, and as such, are killing the future of America. You need to stand up now and take action and be held accountable for your responsibilities. And if you want to continue to be sort of supported by the NRA like Marco Rubio, that's okay, because we'll vote you out. It's as simple as that. The next thing that I want to talk about is much of what's said in politics is spectacle. People need to realize that oftentimes these politicians can come up here and speak about these things, but at the end of the day, those things do not matter in any way, shape, or form unless they take action and actually stand up for what they say. The students in DC that I spoke to said that they've met with politicians multiple times, and every time they say they're going to do something about it, but they continue to see the death and slaughter of their fellow classmates, friends, and significant others too. How can we allow this to happen? You can say all you want, but when you speak out against these things and you don't take action, this inaction that you have results in the death of these students and the death of America. Another thing that's important to realize is there is a massive amount of racial discrimination in this country, in our legal systems and in our media too. Black students are 3 times as likely as white students to be suspended. Also, when you include more people from law enforcement into these communities, do they do their job correctly much of the time? Yes, but in these communities, they're discriminated against. There was a black man that was shot over 20 times for holding a cell phone in his own backyard. And they wonder why we don't trust them. We need to come together as Americans. These police officers and these law enforcement officials are trying their very hardest to ensure that they can ensure the safety of their communities, but when they come at them like a unified front, almost like a fascist force, these communities don't want to work with them because they see them as a threat, and oftentimes reasonably so, because we've seen again and again the racial discrimination in our justice systems and in law enforcement. What I call on is for every law enforcement officer that's out there, for every law enforcement official that's out here, and every policymaker, make sure that you're reaching out to these communities as human beings. Make sure you show them that you're trying to help them, because right now what they're seeing again and again is you're indiscriminately killing them, and oftentimes they aren't armed. It's unbelievable. What the simple truth is these people don't trust law enforcement because they've seen what's happened. They've seen the racial discrimination. We have to work as a country to fix that, because if we don't, it won't be fixed. Every day, over 96 people in America on average are killed as a result of gun violence. That's 1 every 15 minutes. By the end of this meeting, that means that there's probably another one that's been killed. We have to work as Americans to fix that. And as such, I think we need to come together as Americans. And I think a lot of people that are out there that are fearing what we're saying right now think that we're going to try taking their guns. We're not. The Never Gun movement and the March for Our Lives is not trying to take our guns. We're trying to take back our lives. And because just as much as you have a right to own a weapon, we have the right to liberty, we have the right to peace, and we have the right to live and not be afraid when we go to schools that we're going to be shot. And know that when we're walking on our way to schools and anywhere else that we are going to be safe. But right now we aren't, and that's because of the inaction of politicians everywhere. It's not a Democrat problem, it's not a Republican problem, it's an American problem that we need to face as such. It's disgusting. Lastly, we need to see each other as such, as Americans. We can no longer say, oh, that's a Republican issue, oh, that's a Democrat issue. This is an American issue. This is an issue that if we don't face as American citizens, as policymakers, and keep lying about, we are going to see the innocent slaughter and discrimination of communities everywhere across America and the death of our future as a result. We need to hold our politicians accountable and know what they stand for. But when these politicians, like the 200 that don't have a permanent stance on where they stand with the NRA and gun policies, our democracy is uneducated, and with an uneducated democracy, people don't get out and vote, and as such, democracy turns into dictatorship. So, as a final call to all of you out there that are watching right now, if you think your voice doesn't matter, if you think that this is just another thing that you can move on from, I hate to break it to you, but you can and you will be affected by this in one shape or another if you don't take action now, because I didn't, and I was well informed on this, but I didn't take action, and as such, I'm somewhat responsible for what happened at my school, and just like these policymakers are too, because we again and again have continued to divide each other as Americans. We need to come together to save the future of America, save the future of our democracy, and save these children's lives. If we can't agree on the lives of our children, then why are these policymakers in office? That's my question to them. Why don't we have equal representation? It's because of things like gerrymandering and discrimination by law enforcement that we must face as Americans and call out to work against and solve, because this is an issue that has been around since the birth of America, and it's one that is going to persist and continue to defy what we preach as American citizens, that everybody is created equal. I say we practice what we preach, and we start working towards that, but we can't. If we don't take action, we can't make these false lies. So please, next time you disagree with someone, regardless of if you're a policymaker, regardless of who you are, see that person as an American. Hug them and love them, because we all bleed the same blood, and we are not going to get through this if we work against each other. Thank you. God bless each and every one of you, and God bless America.
Thank you, David. Another Parkland student who survived that day is Alea Eastman. She was, as I understand it, in a class studying Holocaust history when a gunman started shooting through the window of her classroom. Alea, if you'd please share some thoughts with our group today. Thank you.
Hi. It was a normal day that day, and unfortunately, I lost 2 people in my class and 6 were hit. I was on the wrong side of the class, and no student should have to cover themselves with a deceased classmate to survive. But I was that student. We can't only focus on school shootings, though. Urban communities and low-income communities have always been hit with gun violence forever. I lost my uncle due to gun violence in Brooklyn 15 years ago, and nothing has changed. Columbine happened, nothing's changed. Sandy Hook happened, nothing's changed. Parkland happened, nothing's changed. I went to school yesterday, and I was late, and I walked right through the office. Who knows, I could have been walking in with another Nicholas Cruz. They didn't check my ID, didn't check my bag as we just walked through. We have to do something. This cannot happen again, and nothing's happening. It's been 36 days and nothing's happened. We have to move fast. Thank you.
Alea, thank you very much. Just as no child should have to endure what the students from Parkland endured, no parent should have to go through what the parents at Parkland endured. And with us is Stacey Ann Llewellyn, Alea's mom.
"15 years ago, I lost my brother to gun violence. 15 years later, gun violence crept up in my daughter's school to take her life. But God said no, not today. However, we lost 17 people that day, 14 kids and 3 teachers. I want the laws to change. I want to be able to send my daughter to school and be at work and not get that phone call and hearing shots in the background. That was the most devastating day of my life. Getting my daughter back at 10 o'clock that night, it felt like a rebirth. I got my baby back. But what about those 17 people, their parents, their loved ones, what they got to go through? The laws need to change, and it needs to change now. Listen to the kids. Don't stand behind them. Don't stand in front of them. Stand with them. I'm standing with my daughter. She's here for the Nicholas that she hid under his body. She's here to represent her angel. Thank you.
These personal stories are extraordinary. Another person with an extraordinary personal story is the librarian from Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, Diana Perry Haneski. I was talking to her at the outset of this, and she said, I didn't display any different level of courage than anybody else would have in my situation. I'll let her describe what she did. All of us here, I think, doubt that very seriously. Thank you for your bravery.
Thank you, Prosecutors Against Gun Violence and Senator Feinstein, for the opportunity to be here in our nation's capital, among some of our champions in Congress and members of law enforcement. I'm Diana Haneski, and I'm here today because the school and community I love was changed forever on February 14th, a Valentine's Day that began full of hope for so many of my students. Ended with the tragic death of 17 people. 17 bright and promising lives were senselessly cut short, and our school will never be the same. That day, I did everything I was trained to do as part of my job as a librarian at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School. When I heard that the school was on lockdown over the radio, I knew I needed to act. I immediately called students in to bring them into safety and locked students and colleagues in a back room, in an equipment room in our library media center. We did everything we could. We blocked the door, we turned the lights off, we were quiet. Later, we would discover the horrible, horrible things that happened while we were trying to be safe from the shooter. our worst fears became a reality. If today was like any other Thursday, I'd be back in the library helping students, helping them learn, and I can't be silent when there are solutions right in front of us that can prevent the horrific daily toll of gun violence on our country. Gun violence kills more than 90 Americans and injures hundreds more every day. Requiring a background check for every gun sale should be the foundation of any gun violence prevention effort. I hold in my hand a letter signed by 325 survivors of gun violence, parents, siblings, children, and loved ones from 46 states and Washington, D.C. Survivors of gun violence from across the country will act in solidarity with students March 24th and march for our lives. And come November, we will vote. I'm so proud of the extraordinary students who have shown all of us that the safety of our children must be our top priority. I did my part to protect them on February 14th. It's up to our elected officials to do their part and pass stronger gun laws to keep our communities safe. You'd think it would be easy, and I want it to be easy, so I want everyone to try. Thank you.
Diana, thank you very much. The Brady Campaign to prevent gun violence has been one of the most important voices in America on this issue. I knew Sarah Brady. I worked with Sarah Brady and was very proud to do so. We have with us today the co-president of the Brady Campaign. Where'd she go? Right here. Okay. Chris Brown. Chris, as co-president, helps to shape the focus of this organization. She's one of the key leaders of Brady, but more than that, she's one of the key leaders on gun violence prevention in the United States. Chris, thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Cy. Thank you, Prosecutors Against Gun Violence. Thank you to all of the folks who've spoken before me, particularly David and Alea. Thank you so much. The nation has watched you since February 14th. Lift up your voices. And what I see as a mother, this doesn't get any easier. It's profoundly sad to think that we live in a country where 96 Americans every single day are dying from gun violence, where 36,000 people are going to lose their lives to gun violence, 100,000 more than that shot due to gun violence. And yet, we do nothing. Ultimately, what I see these kids fighting for is truly their lives. Nothing short of their lives, because what they are saying is, I want to be able to live my life and go to school without the fear of being shot. And to David and Alea, I also thank you very much for making clear that it is not simply about schools here. That is obviously a critical component. There are far too many children in this country where the safest part of their day is in school. And walking to school in neighborhoods riddled by gun violence, we have not done enough. And we at Brady believe 3 fundamental things need to happen as soon as possible tomorrow, because there are bills pending on each of these things right now. 1, close the loopholes in the Brady law. That law was enacted in 1994. That was before the internet was a big thing and before gun shows were a big thing. Now they are. And as a result, a private seller can sell a gun over the internet without doing any background check. 1 in 5 guns sold today is sold without a background check. We need to close that loophole. There's legislation pending in Congress to do that. It's inexcusable that that is not moving forward. It should. Number 2, we need to enact more extreme risk laws. Why? We know they work. Senator Blumenthal talked about the Connecticut experience. We know that those orders that have been issued 40% of the time, looking back on those orders, they were issued because someone was at risk to others. Most of the time, looking back in the Connecticut experience, the people who are subject to orders get mental health treatment, which is critical, and those guns are removed. That is a common sense solution. There's legislation pending in Congress. We need to enact it. The third thing, the third point in Brady's 3-point plan, is we have to renew the assault weapons ban. When you look at mass shooting after mass shooting in America, there is one common denominator, and that's the use of an assault weapon. We need to reinstate that ban, and we need to do it as soon as possible. So thank you, Prosecutors Against Gun Violence, for your leadership, and thank you all for being here today.
Thank you, Chris, very much. Robin Thomas. Robin Thomas has been with Giffords Law Center to prevent gun violence as executive director since 2006. I have an opportunity to work closely with Robin over the years. Her expertise on these issues is second to none, and her leadership in the effort to prevent gun violence has been just exceptional. Robin, it's an honor to have you here.
Good afternoon. First, of course, my thanks not just to law enforcement and prosecutors and the students who are here today, but also to lots of the leading advocates around the country who've been fighting on this issue for a long time. The Giffords Law Center was originally founded after a mass shooting in a law firm in San Francisco. And following that mass shooting, we were able to pass the original federal assault weapon ban as well as help get the Brady bill through. So a mass shooting 25 years ago, which led to our founding, also led to action and progress because the people impacted by those shootings were outraged. There's a famous picture of a husband of a woman who was lost in the shooting with his 1-year-old daughter on his shoulders testifying here in those federal hearings. It brought passion to the cause. We have now merged with Gabby Giffords' organization, and we are the Giffords Law Center, and we also all know what happened to Gabby Giffords doing her job as a congresswoman. She is still our courageous inspiration for the work we do and is bringing much needed leadership on this issue. The thing about gun violence is that there actually are solutions. This is not an inevitable problem. There are many steps that can be taken to prevent gun violence and save lives. In California, we have robust, comprehensive gun regulation, one of the lowest gun death rates in the country. It's dropped by almost 60% in the last 25 years. There are answers. This idea that we can't fix this problem is a fallacy propagated by the NRA. What stands in the way of passing comprehensive gun reform that still stands up to the Supreme Court's Second Amendment protection is just the NRA and their stranglehold on our politicians. And I commend so greatly these students for immediately seeing that link. It is not that we don't have solutions. It is that there is a force in place that is preventing our legislators from doing the right thing, following their conscience, and passing measures that can save lives. I won't go back into all of the legislative issues that have been covered today, except to say they are just the beginning. That's the beginning of what we need. Protective orders, background checks, assault weapon regulations. There's so many more things we can do, and you can go and look on our website and see all of these amazing laws that are tested, proven to work, and could easily be put in place to prevent these shootings. The other thing I want to mention is that we released a report shortly after the shooting called Protecting the Parkland Generation. And what I'm so proud of about that report is that it does talk about school shootings, their prevalence, and the impact they have on American youth. We also talk about the impact of gun violence in urban communities, the amount of trauma and the amount of pain being experienced in poor communities, impacted communities of color, and the impact on youth of those shootings. And there, again, is so much we can do to stop those shootings. There are solutions, and cities that are implementing those solutions, like Oakland, California, which just saw the lowest gun death rate in almost 40 years last year, because they have passed innovative reforms to address gun violence in Oakland. We also look at domestic violence, we look at suicide, and we talk about the impact of all kinds of gun violence on youth in America. These are all issues that have solutions that we can address, and we can make a difference. We know what the answers are. What's been lacking, other than the NRA's interference, is the passion gap. We have the answers, we have the facts, we have the side of right. What is it that separates our side from the NRA and gun rights fanatics who fight against gun regulation? Has been a passion gap. And these young people from Parkland and across the country are bridging that divide. They are raising our passion and our conscience. They're asking us to do it for them. They're asking us to do it for ourselves and for America. And that is something that we need to get up off our couches and figure out how to do. We're going to do it this Saturday in more than 600 locations across the country, but that is just the beginning. That is a shot across the bow to our legislators to know know that we will no longer put up with their inaction. That march is a statement that we are off our couches and we are in this fight, and we are not going to give up. I know that these kids aren't going to give up because you can see the fire in their eyes, and I know that we stand behind them with whatever they need, whenever they need it, and we will stand next to them on Saturday and as they go forward. So I thank everyone who's here today. I'm especially grateful to prosecutors for standing up on an issue that's not always easy for prosecutors to stand up on. This has always been a controversial issue, and when you choose to stand up for gun safety, you choose to stand in the fire. It is a really tough one. You get a lot of pushback, you get death threats, and you get angry, hurtful comments at you. This is not the kind of thing that you can step out on in a quiet and calm way. So to the prosecutors, to law enforcement, to these students and advocates, I know what it is to stand on this issue, and so I'm grateful to each and every one of you. I and my organization are committed to this fight, and we are not going anywhere. This is the time for change, and we're going to make it happen. So thank you.
Very brave mom. Prevent injuries arising from gun violence. Debbie?
I want to say thank you to the survivors that are here that have spoken. You're so courageous. And these are just a few faces of the thousands and thousands of survivors across our country. And I greatly appreciate, David, your words and the focus on 96 people a day lose their life due to being shot. And we can't forget that. In the past month, we have all been deeply moved by the words of Parkland students and then other students across the country joining them to step up to say to lawmakers, protect us, reject the NRA, pass gun safety laws now. Across the country, millions of Americans are standing up to the demand meaningful action to reduce gun violence in America. It's been a month since Parkland shooting. In 2 days, teenagers and students will lead nearly over 800 marches across our country and internationally for the March for Our Lives events in Washington, D.C. and in their communities in every single state. Everytown for Gun Safety is proud to be partnering with this new generation of passionate leaders lending support by providing grants to local sibling marches organically coming together in communities big and small. Everytown, the goal of these grant programs is to ensure that these sibling marches around the country have operational resources to organize these powerful events. More than 200 communities from Lexington, Kentucky to Spokane, Washington have received grants for their local marches already. And we are proud to stand beside them. Just since Parkland, Americans are really stepping up. 140,000 people have reached out to us to become volunteers. We currently have 75,000 Mom Demand Action volunteers across America, and now we're adding 140,000 more. And they're not just moms, they're dads, they're veterans, they're gun owners that are saying the NRA does not speak for me. We also have had 1.7 million join us online through our email and SMS list. This movement is only getting started. And as it's been said today, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And as David was telling me earlier, the starting line, the start point, is Saturday at all the March for Our Lives events. We've all been so deeply moved by the Parkland students and the other students. But here in Washington, Republican leaders of the Congress have met this moment with a collective shrug. It's unacceptable by bending backwards to not talk about guns. Congress is giving the NRA exactly what it wants. Instead, Congress should be passing criminal background checks on every gun sale, a policy supported by 97% of American voters. Legislation to disarm domestic abusers by closing the boyfriend loophole, and red flag laws that empower family members and law enforcement to petition a judge to temporarily block a person from having guns if they pose a danger to themselves and others. And 60 people people a day end their life by suicide with a firearm, and we cannot forget, again, the 96 people a day. None of these policies and life-saving legislation is controversial. They're all common sense, and they're all bipartisan, and they deserve a vote. One message to Congress is simple. You're either with the vast majority of the country on gun safety, or you're with the NRA. Our elected officials have had more than enough time to take action. Our state legislators are taking action. It's not happened at the congressional level. If they don't have the courage to lead, we'll throw them out and replace them with people who do. Please remember these faces and these voices. We can't forget. Thank you.
Josh Horowitz, Executive Director and the co-founder of the Consortium for Risk-Based Firearms Policy. It's an organization which has issued recommendations on how to keep guns away from those most likely to prevent violent acts. It's an organization that's been a very close partner of Prosecutors Against Gun Violence who work together to create a blueprint about how to get guns out of the hands of domestic abusers. And Josh's organization was the catalyst for the changes in California we've heard about around gun violence restraining orders. Josh?
Mike, thanks. Thank you, Prosecutors Against Gun Violence, Mike and Cy. Thank you, law enforcement, and of course to the students and advocates and my fellow advocates. Thank you for being here. After Sandy Hook, when the shooter was legally able to purchase an assault rifle, we were in despair. We said we cannot let this happen again. Myself and my team and academics and practitioners sat down and thought about what we could do. My group is the Educational Fund to Stop Gun Violence, but I invited all sorts of other professionals to think hard about this, and the Consortium for Risk-Based Firearm Policy was born. We said we need new methods. We need new tools to take guns out of the hands of people at risk of future dangerousness. We designed a policy called a Gun Violence Restraining Order, which gives law enforcement what they need: clear, legal authority to remove guns from someone who is dangerous. We worked in California after the Isla Vista shooting to pass that policy. We built on an existing Connecticut policy, and since then, we have passed that law in Washington, Oregon, and now Florida. But unfortunately in Florida, it was after this tragedy. After we passed the law in California, I've heard from the sheriff of Santa Barbara and saying, hey, Wonks, thank you so much for thinking this up. It really works. I now have the authority to take guns away from people who are at risk to my officers, to their family members, and to the community. Think about what happened in Florida. Florida passed this bill as a response. It should have passed it before that, to give the sheriff of Broward County the authority that he needed. He was in contact with the shooter many times, but the shooter was not a prohibited person. We need to make sure that when someone's descending into a crisis, when someone's at a risk for violence, we can get the gun out of their hands and allow them to get the treatment or whatever they need to heal. This policy is in effect. It's saving lives in some states. We need it now in every state. And I'm so excited to be working with the group behind me, especially the prosecutors, to make sure that gun violence restraining orders, extreme risk laws are in every state so that law enforcement never again have to say, I wish I had the tools. Let's give them the tools. And it's very exciting. I'm going to hear from Jeff Swanson later about the research behind this, but this law works, and we need it every place. And thank you for everybody here working so hard to make that happen.
Thank you, Josh. It's really displayed the breadth of the expertise and the passion and the leadership that's assembled here. We have two final speakers. One is a doctor, the other is a police chief. Dr. Jeff Swanson is a professor of psychiatry and behavioral sciences at the Duke University School of Medicine. He's here because he is the author or co-author of more than 200 publications focused on the epidemiology of violence and serious mental illness, and his work has been a catalyst for changes in the laws and policy that reduce domestic violence and gun violence. Dr. Swanson, thank you very much for being here, Joe.
Thank you. Thank you, Prosecutors Against Gun Violence. And it's a real honor for me to be here. I'm here as a researcher, someone who believes in evidence-based policymaking. And I'd like to just pose 3 simple questions about gun violence restraining orders and try to answer them briefly with research evidence. The first question is, why do we need a risk-based, preemptive, temporary, civil court-ordered gun removal law? What, in terms of the puzzle of gun violence prevention, what's the piece that fills? Why do we need that? What's the logic for it? Well, the simple answer is there are too many people dying in the United States every day as a result of a gunshot by a person who owned that gun legally and would pass a background check. So background checks are great, but it's not going to stop all the people who are at risk and do not have a gun disqualifying criminal record or mental health record. We know that about 9% of the adults in this country have impulsive, angry behavior problems, destructive, unpredictable anger, and have access to firearms. Many of them are not disqualified from guns. Many of them have multiple guns. We also know that more than half, almost 2/3 of the gun deaths in the United States are suicides, people who die of their own hand. And many of them also are not prohibited from firearms. We did a study in Florida a couple of years ago and looked at a sample of people who died with a firearm at their own hand, gun suicides, and 72% of those individuals were legally eligible to purchase and possess a firearm on the day they used one to end their life. We also know that there is information, there are people around those individuals, family members, friends, acquaintances, who have very specific information that these individuals are troubled, that they're descending maybe into a crisis. But if that individual owns a gun legally and isn't interested in just being separated from it, what are you going to do? Well, in the states that have enacted these risk-based restraining order laws, there is something to do. One can seek a court order from a judge or reach out to law enforcement, and those firearms, that incredibly efficient killing technology, can be taken away from that person as a public safety measure. So the second question, how do we know if states have a law like this that it's not going to be applied too broadly and to take away guns from people who are law-abiding and who are not so risky? Well, one great answer was provided by Senator Blumenthal and Congressman Carbajal when they discussed the due process protections that are there in terms of the involvement of a judge with a court order. So that's one answer. But there's an answer from research as well. When we studied all of the cases in Connecticut of people who'd had their guns removed, and many of them had suicide concerns, we looked out into the future, as it were, followed up those cases and matched the death records, and we found that they had a rate of suicide 40 times higher than the general population. So we know this is a population of risky people. It's being targeted to people who need that intervention. If finding a risky person is like searching for a needle in a haystack, this gives you a much smaller haystack with a lot more needles in it. It's a much more efficient way to find someone, whether they are at risk of harming others or themselves. Last question, how do we know this works? What's the evidence that it saves lives? Again, I'd like to answer in terms of suicide, because that's what we were able to study in Connecticut. When we looked at the numbers of people who did go on to die by matching the death records of all the people in Connecticut over all of the years since the law was enacted in 1999, and we looked at the methods that people used after their guns had been taken away, and 7 guns per person was the number of firearms removed from these individuals. So they're not only at risk, but they have a lot of guns. And we were able to see that many more people would have died had the guns not been taken away. Because the fact is, if people try to commit suicide and they use anything but a gun, they're very likely to survive, and they can get help, and they go on and they die from something else at a later time in life. If they use a firearm, they almost never survive. So that can be a permanent solution to a temporary problem, and it's a wonderful public health opportunity if we could limit access to lethal means. We found, by estimating with our statistical analysis, that one life was saved for every 10 to 20 gun removal actions. That's the information, what's in the balance of risk and rights that we'd like to put in the hands of lawmakers. This is a law that works. It is supported by majorities of Americans across the political spectrum, as well as gun owners. And it's time that lawmakers get with their constituents and do something and provide this tool for family members and law enforcement. And the evidence is there. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about it.
Jeff, thank you very much. Final speaker, the anchor of this press conference, is a partner of Prosecutors Against Gun Violence who stood with us before. When we were here, as Cy Vance mentioned, just 4 months ago, standing with dozens of prosecutors and uniformed law enforcement leaders from throughout the United States, a convening that had never happened before quite like that for the first time. Again, Washington, D.C. Metro Police Chief Pete Newsham was there, and he's here today. And he's here standing up and representing law enforcement leaders around the United States who agree that we should be implementing the common sense measures that everyone here is so passionately pushing for. Chief Newsham.
Mike, thank you. As always, the Prosecutors Against Gun Violence have assembled an array of very important people to come and speak here today. We've heard from 2 senators. We've heard from a congressman. We have prosecutors who prosecute cases in the biggest cities in the country. We have advocates who have been working to stop gun violence in our country. And as one of our speakers mentioned, oftentimes they have to do that against the threat of violence to their own personal safety. But the heroes, if you will allow me, in the room are the folks who have come here from Parkland. We have a librarian, we have a mother, and we have 2 students. And I would say that you are not heroes because of what happened on that fateful day, but you are heroes because you said never again. And you are standing up against gun violence. And I truly believe, because of what you have done, that people are listening. And I think on the footsteps of the Capitol on Saturday, you will see that people are listening. So thank you. Thank you for having the courage to come here. So I am Peter Newsham. I'm the Chief of Police of the Metropolitan Police Department. It's an honor and a privilege to stand alongside these folks. Despite efforts over the past few decades, gun-related violence remains a troublesome, persistent problem in our communities. The numbers are staggering, and the images displayed nightly across television screens in urban, suburban, and rural households are a harsh reality. Gun violence negatively impacts all communities across our country, and there is no better time than now to enact common sense gun laws. This Saturday, hundreds of thousands of folks, mostly school-aged, will descend upon Washington, D.C., and kids from other cities to advocate for common sense gun laws. It should not take our young people to tell us to use common sense. Laws that require universal background checks, limits the access to high-powered assault-style weapons and high-capacity magazines, and as we said, red flag laws are common sense. I've said this before, and I stand behind it today. There is absolutely no reason for anyone in our communities to possess an assault weapon. These weapons were designed for the specific purpose of killing human beings in a warfare situation, and they have no business being in our communities. And most of my law enforcement colleagues agree. Here in D.C., we have strict gun laws and a ban on the possession of assault weapons, and as a result, we have made huge progress in reducing violent crime in our city. But we are policing in the nation's capital, which is only 67 square miles. Access to assault-style weapons is just a short drive away. That's why federal legislation is necessary. The time to act is now. We should not have to lose another life on our streets because of a lack of common sense. I'm urging action now so that communities like the District of Columbia and communities across this nation will be safer. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. We're prepared to take questions. Please. Do you have a question in the back? No. Go ahead.
I have a question for David.
You just want me to stand up here? I can answer all the questions you guys got.
The other side of this debate has frequently been very effective at making sure that Republican members of Congress, for example, vote in line with their priorities and challenge them in Republican primaries, those who don't. I'm curious, do you think your side of the debate should take more stringent action against maybe even some Democrats who have wavered in the past on things like the assault weapons ban and universal background checks?
Oh, absolutely. And we're trying to do that as much as possible because this is not a Democrat or Republican problem. There are Democrats that are supported by the NRA. And I think in the same way that the NRA, they don't have that much, they spend a lot of money, but in comparison, like they spend a lot of money on campaign contributions and things like that. But in comparison with some of the other groups like the National Association of Realtors, which is one of the biggest lobbyist groups, they don't spend that much. Where their power lies is in their membership because they tell people to go to specific meetings and talk to their congressmen because a lot of their membership are retired people that are able to get out and be politically active. Well, many of the people in this country that have the exact opposite belief that we should have common sense gun regulations in this country are people that are young, people that are hardworking American citizens that oftentimes don't have time to get out and speak to their congressmen as much, and as such, their voices aren't equally represented at the table in Congress and across America and state legislators and local. I think in reality, we can use the same strategy that the NRA uses where they have people go out and speak to their congressmen, but we have to make sure that people across America, no matter where they are, go and speak to their elected officials, because if they don't, their voices won't be heard.
Other questions?
Yes, we would, because if it's as simple as this, either you stand with the kids or you stand with the NRA, and we're asking people to put the USA over the NRA. We've allowed this to continue for too long. These people have made their voices heard, which is great, but they do not represent the voices of most American citizens when I say that. When they say like they don't want any gun laws, most Americans, we can agree that most Americans want to save lives. We want to ensure the safety and security of our nation. But when we allow these lobbyist groups like the NRA and the Gun Owners of America and so many others to own our politicians and take our voice, they continue to allow the slaughter of our future and our children. Because what we need here is Americans to make their voice heard, because they can buy our politicians, but they can't buy us. But when you don't vote, you're complicit in that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's a percent. Okay. So with the Dickey kind of repeal, what an important thing to realize is it didn't specifically ban research on it. They just made it so they couldn't fund it from the CDC. We need to make sure that we implement reasonable legislation that allows Congress and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention to study these things and have it funded. Because right now they're allowed to, they just don't have funding for it. We need to make sure that in this bill that we're researching something that costs thousands of Americans' lives every year. We need to be able to fund that. And in the same way that they're taking action, and I think that shows some of the pressure that we have. In Florida, for example, they made it so you can't purchase a firearm if you're to purchase a firearm only for public sales. A lot of gun sales are private, and at gun shows where you don't need it, you don't need to be 21, and that bill doesn't cover that. They purposely make sure that these politicians have loopholes in these gun laws so gun owners can continue to buy these guns without any specific background check, for example. So it looks like they're doing something when in reality they're just creating more loopholes in the system that we're going to have to plug. And it's through pointing those things out, like you can purchase a gun if you're 18 in Florida and it's a private sale, that we're going to fix this. because we have to.
I completely agree. It seems like something is fixed and then there's another thing that's reopened. And it's like, we just need to fix everything. You can't, fix one thing and then there's also a loophole. So I completely agree with David.
One of the most amazing things that I think a lot of Republicans push for is voter ID laws that disproportionately affect people of color and poorer communities, while they don't want to push for voter IDs to get guns. Ironic, isn't it?
Any other questions?
David and Alaya, can you tell me what's going to come after this march? How do you keep that momentum going after?
Don't stop.
Yeah. So the main way that we're ensuring that we continue this momentum is after the march, congressmen are supposed to be in their congressional districts on recess, and we're calling for every congressional district to have a town hall with their congressmen where they're held accountable and those local affiliates go and they ask questions about what they are doing to ensure that this continues. The other things that we're doing is on April 20th, the anniversary of Columbine, we're having another national school walkout. And after that, we're continuing to make sure that every month, for example, we're going to try establishing a set of clubs across America in schools and communities that are both poor, rich, black, white, Asian, Latino, everywhere, because this is America and we're diverse, so that every month we have a goal. For example, in February, or not February, if in April, everybody goes and organizes so that they all go to their state capitals and lobby on behalf of themselves and their classmates and their peers and practice their First Amendment rights to peacefully protest and ask the people who are working for them, not the gun lobby, what they're doing to ensure the safety and security of not only their lives, but the future of their children and America.
A lot of people feel like this is the end and the march is just, that's going to be it. The march is just the start. We will fight for this until change happens. If you guys don't want to hear about it anymore, you fix it so we don't have to keep repeating ourselves.
Yeah. The other thing that's important to realize is this anger that we face a lot of the time when I, for example, call out Marco Rubio, Governor Rick Scott, and a lot of both Democrat and Republican members that are heavily supported by the NRA, even to this day, that say that they support children but still take money from the NRA. Disgusting, by the way. You shouldn't vote them back in. Is that anger is almost like adrenaline for this run-in, and that's a great way to get us started, but what we really need here is love and compassion for every single American, no matter what your opinions are. We need to understand and discuss these things, not debate them, because love and compassion in this situation is stamina, and anger is absolutely draining emotionally, while love and compassion are emotionally energizing, and that's what we need in this situation. What we face in America is polarization from both sides that our political leaders have failed us on both sides of the aisle, where they've continued to push their partisan politics and make it seem like we're against each other. Now is the time, more than ever, that we have to come together as Americans, not as Democrats and Republicans, and save the future of our America and ensure the safety and security of our children too.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And your mom.
Thank you. Hopefully that math test is